Us on the line is Henry Barbour, longtime friend, campaign consultant, and my first boss out of college on Haley Barbour's campaign. How are you doing this morning, Henry?
How about that? One of the
I
best
say you were my
hires I
first
ever
boss.
made,
I think I was so junior. I think I reported to somebody who eventually reported to Henry, but I got to see Henry Barbour from time to time. So you doing all right?
I'm doing well. Lucien, I will never forget, we had the Vice President, Cheney, come to Columbus, Mississippi, to MUW for some event. I can't remember exactly what it was, but we needed somebody to kind of warm up the crowd. And young Lucien Smith just got thrown out there, and immediately a star was born. And here you are. And as the backup to Paul Gallo,
there we go.
Extraordinary talent. So I appreciate being on the show with you, Lucien.
Well, my parents, Henry, recently moved from where they lived when I was working on that campaign, and last week I helped clean out my old room from 20 years ago, and I'm embarrassed to say I think I still have 3 Barbour for Governor staple guns that I never turned in. So if I owe the PAC some funds for that, just send me an email.
You can just buy me lunch.
There we go. Well, we're 8 days out from a statewide election. I think most of the focus right now is probably on the governor's race. I don't think there's any real question that the Republicans will maintain overwhelming control of the legislature. How do you see things shaping out as we come into this home stretch?
I don't think there's much question that we have a close race in the governor's race. I think Tate should win, but he won't necessarily win if we don't get significant. And if we don't, then I think Brandon Presley has a chance of slipping in and winning. He has gotten an incredible amount of money from Washington Democrats. I think the DGA has sent $3.75 million, and he's raised over $8 million, which is a record for a Democrat candidate. And Lucien, my thinking is if the Democrats have put in over $8 million so far, surely they're going to put in the last $2 million to gin up their turnout. And we know the Democrats are very capable of turning out a big vote. We saw that. We've seen it time and again. And so, turnout for Republicans is key. And so I think it's a close race, Lucien.
In terms of when you said there's a possibility of Brandon sneaking in there if the Republicans don't show up, would you imagine that being on day one or that being in a runoff?
It's harder for him to win on day one. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I mean, is there a chance for a runoff? Yeah, sure there is. But that's kind of like when people ask you about, if you're the Ole Miss team, how are we going to do against Georgia? Well, you better not worry about Georgia until we deal with Texas A&M. And
right.
Unfortunately, we dealt with Vandy this weekend. So you got to do it, I think, one at a time. And I think from a campaign perspective, all we need to worry about right now is November 7th.
Right.
And if you end up in a runoff, you'll deal with that. But I think it's important. I think that for Tate Reeves, there are a number of things I think he's done well as governor. He's raised the bar on education. Our 4th grade reading and math gains lead the nation. We've jumped from 49th to 21st in reading scores. Graduation rates have increased tremendously with the largest pay raise to our teachers. We've got record jobs, higher wages. I mean, average income is up nearly 30% since 2020, which is pretty incrable.
And Tate has had Tate's had just a laser focus on economic development. I mean, that's always been one of his sort of signature policy areas.
No question that he has, and I think he really demonstrated that, Lucian, during COVID, when he made sure that, as he said, every job is essential, and particularly if it's your job. And so he wanted to make sure that we not only that we kept the economy open, that people were able to go to church, that the schools stayed open. Once we got through that first, couple months of, all right, what is this COVID thing? And so Mississippi, I think, took the right route there, unlike, I'll say, the country generally, and Democrat states in particular closed down and really kind of eroded personal freedoms in a significant way. But Lucian, one of the, I think, things that Tate has done that's significant, and I give credit to the legislature too, is we're doing a better job of putting criminals behind bars and keeping families safer. We've got more police on the street. We've got more prosecutors. We've increased penalties for violent crime. But under Tate's leadership, he's really been aggressive at taking on crime in our capital city. And I think that's important. He's made it a priority to use resources that were not available before with the help of the legislature. He added up to 150 Capitol police officers who previously, Lucian, of course, they weren't on the payroll, but all Capitol Police, did, and I don't mean to belittle it, but they protected buildings. They kept state employees safe, and that's important.
But it's different than their mission now.
Doing that to a real police force.
You're right.
And I think that's significant for people in Jackson. You've got more prosecutors, investigators, and I think if you live in Belhaven, if you live in Northeast Jackson, and even in the metro area, I think it makes you safer. And the mayor has opposed that. Mayor Lumumba doesn't like it. And Brandon Presley has said he opposes it. And I will say, if you're a voter in Jackson and you're a little bit on the fence about Tate, and maybe you're a soft Tate supporter, or maybe you're undecided, if you want to undo the 150 Capitol police officers like the mayor does and Brandon Presley, I think that's a great reason to go vote for Tate Reeves on November 7th.
Yeah, you can tell the difference in Jackson with the presence of the Capitol Police. Just seeing them going up and down 55, going up and down Old Canton. That is a major change that I think is going to serve the city and the state really well moving forward.
Yeah, I was surprised. Several months ago, I was driving behind the district, heading over to Ridgewood, and I saw that the police were stopping cars, and I just assumed this was JPD. And then I got up there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is Capitol Police. And at that point, maybe I just didn't quite appreciate. They are patrolling the town,
right?
And that's just, it's significant. And who could be against having more police? It's sort of like being against clean water in Jackson,
especially in a town that has a serious crime problem. Henry, we're coming up on a break. Do you have time for one more segment with us?
With you, I do.
Y'all stick with this. Is Lucien Smith in for Paul Gallo here on the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk Mississippi. Stick with us for more. Well, we still have on the line Henry Barbour, Republican National Committee man, GOP strategist. Henry, Wednesday there's going to be a debate between Presley and Governor Reeves, and I know when that debate was initially announced, there were some people who seemed to want to kind of make hay of it for Presley, as though that somehow suggested that the Reeves campaign thought they were in trouble. But my view was this is just standard. You kind of have to debate in a governor's race. You can't really get away with it in a general like you might be able to in a primary.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's an expectation that there will be a debate, just like there's an expectation come this next fall that the Republican and Democrat presidential candidates will debate. So it's the same thing in the governor's race. And I think, Lucian, that plays to Tate's advantage, because I think if we're talking about the real issues, that it's to Tate's advantage. I think that Brandon Presley has tried to kind of make up some issues, trying to tie Tate to things he's not even tied to, in order to try to win. Because we were talking about earlier, if you look at jobs, you look at raising the bar on education, you look at fighting crime, Tate's done a really good job. He's been a good, effective governor. If you look at what he did with COVID, he's got a great story to tell. And I think the problem for Brandon Presley is, had he been governor, I think we know during COVID, he would have governed like Gavin Newsom, California, or Cuomo from New York. And I think these are contrasts that Tate will be able to make. And so I think it's good for Tate, but it's just like anything. Brandon Presley will have his opportunity. Tate will have his opportunity. It'd be good for the voters.
I think that's right. And I also think it's just generally true, certainly true in this race, but I think generally true when Republicans make races about policy, we tend to win, because most people in Mississippi want the kind of policy they get from Republicans, whereas if it's all about who had the harder childhood and who's got a cuter family and who's, some sort of narrative storytelling, we don't do that as well as the Democrats as a general rule, but we crush it when we talk about policy.
That's right. If we focus on ideas and executing them, we're going to make the state stronger, safer, freer, and that's hopefully, Lucian, the same thing happens at the national level next year, because I think we all would agree, about 2/3 of the country thinks the country's on the wrong track, and again,
and the other third must be crazy.
For president's got to focus on ideas and not. And that kind of gets into a whole nother conversation, but I definitely agree with you.
What do you expect to see at the debate? Just sort of a pull between Tate wanting to talk about his achievements and the good story he's got to tell about being governor versus sort of a more narrative focus from Presley?
Yeah, and I think Presley's going to try to attack him on the issues that he's been trying to attack him on, the TANF that happened when Tate Reeves was lieutenant governor. He had nothing to do with it. And but I can tell you, Lucian, as you know, the out-of-state consultants who are helping run Brandon Presley's campaign, ran a poll and they found out, well, they tried to blame Tate Reeves for TANF debacle.
It moved some people.
It moved voters. Well, okay, but they don't ask the question, is it true or not? And so Brandon Presley needs to change the subject from Tate's record to things that he wants to make up about Tate Reeves.
Hey, Henry, you've been involved in lots of campaigns. You obviously were campaign manager for Governor Barbour's first run in 2003. Lots changed in how campaigns work in the last 20 years. But I mean, what would you say is going on inside the Reeves campaign right now as they prepare these final 8 days?
They're focused on turnout. They're focused on voters and their leaders. On a peer-to-peer basis, reaching out to their neighbors, their friends, their coworkers, their family, encouraging them that it matters, that the race is close, and that we've got to get a big turnout. If we don't get a big turnout, that's how we end up with a Democrat governor fighting with our legislature each and every day and teaming up with people like Lumumba and the Capitol City, risk of taking Capitol police officers off the streets, all of Jackson safer. And so I think they're focused on turnout and those issues that where Tate has had great success.
Yeah, and that to me is and you said this in the first segment, but you're absolutely right. I mean, that's the biggest risk Republicans have, is that we've had so much success over the course of the last 20 years that people start thinking once the primary is over, it's done, because it's so easy for people who aren't like you and me, who don't live and breathe this sort of stuff, to go, well, we got soccer after school, and we got busy getting the kids off to school in the morning, and it's raining, and it doesn't matter for me to show up, and we've got a message exactly the way you just did. Make sure people know they absolutely must show up. If they're eligible to vote early, they can go to their circuit clerk's office today and cast an absentee ballot if they fall into one of those criteria. But if they can't, they've got to show up on November 7th and cast their ballot.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, if you want to vote absentee, you have all this week to go to your county circuit clerk's office, and even this Saturday morning until noon. And it's important to vote, and it does matter. I mean, the race could be very, very close, and it will be close if people in places like DeSoto County decide, well, it's just not that important. The encouraging thing, I think, in a place like DeSoto is there are a bunch of local races, there are legislative races, and races that deal with the courthouse, sheriff, circuit clerk, et cetera, that are going to help encourage people to vote, because those local candidates are working hard. But there's not any doubt that that's the thing that the Tate Reeves campaign and his team, Tate's team, are thinking about is, how do we get folks out? How do we get Tate in front of people to remind them it's next and a week from tomorrow, and it's a close race. As you said, Lucien, Republicans have gotten used to winning in Mississippi, but I guarantee you, the Democrats are going to slip up on us at some point and win the governor's race when we just kind of fall asleep as Republican voters. And
which is kind of what happened to the Democrats 30 years ago. That they've gotten so accustomed to winning. August decided all these offices, and y'all were busy building a party that came in and started taking those offices away from them.
That's right, and we see it happen around us sometimes in U.S. Senate races. Alabama elected a Democrat. Georgia now has 2 Democrats, and a lot of factors in what happened in Georgia. But you've got to prioritize just simply getting out and voting, and not just for yourself, but making sure that your kid that's in college is going to vote. And this is the last week. They can come home and vote absentee. This is the time to call them. You don't have class on Thursday. It really matters. It matters who leads our state. And if you like the 150 Capitol police officers in Jackson, if you want to keep them, you better realize
he's supposed to.
Tate Reeves.
Henry, we've got about 30 seconds left. Any final thoughts before we go to break?
I love elections, and I think it's fun. I think it's fun to watch the numbers come in, but elections have consequences, and we've got a lot of things going right in the state of Mississippi, and if we want to keep it going that way, if we want a governor that's going to work with our legislature, it matters that you get out and vote this week.
Henry, thank you for taking the time to be with us. I appreciate the conversation. Appreciate your making time.
Thank you, Big Lou. All right, man.
Hey. That's been Henry Barbour here with us on the Gallo Show. This is Lucien Smith in for Paul on SuperTalk Mississippi. Stick with us. We'll have Chairman of the Mississippi GOP, Frank Board.